The world has taken a clear rightward lurch, and as a right wing politics rise, how do we, as students of politics, make sense of the age of Trump, the age of Meloni, the age of Modi? I'm Barkha Dutt, you're with the Mojo Story. On the program today, we have all been transfixed by the many jaw dropping moments to have emerged from the White House and the Oval Office in recent weeks. But Donald Trump remains one of America's most popular and strong presidents in recent memory. In India, here it is once again the age of Modi. Not that it ever stopped being the age of Modi, but in June 2024, it appeared as if the power and the rise of Modi had been contained. But a slew of assembly wins tells you that Modi is back as India's biggest and most dominant political brand. Where does this leave liberal elite politics? Where does this leave left of center politics? How do Indian observers understand this rise of the right, or are they still in denial about it? Joining us now is one of India's most astute political commentators, authors, and journalists. Vir Sanghvi is with us. From time to time, we get the benefit of Vir's very perceptive takes on world events and events all around us. Vir, it's great to have you back with us. Let me start by asking you if you were surprised at all with what you saw emerge from the Oval Office, that shouting match, irrespective of where you are on Russia, Ukraine, just that shouting match between Trump and Zelensky. Because if ever there was a reminder that the rules of politics have changed globally, that was it. Were you surprised? Were you amused? Were you entertained? Were you aghast?
Well, I don't think it was a shouting match, Barkha, because Zelensky didn't shout back. It was basically Vance and Trump shouting at him. And yes, I was surprised because I don't think any meeting between world leaders, particularly at a time of such consequence, has happened with the press watching, with Trump stooges watching, and with these two guys bullying Zelensky, who in his own way is a fairly arrogant sort of guy and not used to being talked to that way. So to see Vance being set as sort of a track dog on him, and then Zelensky said something about how there's an ocean between you, but you two will be in trouble, which set Trump off. And after that, there was really no turning back, especially as Zelensky, who was playing to a domestic and European audience, did not appear to want to apologize or walk back anything he was saying. He stood his ground, which bullies are never used to. So what you had was probably unprecedented in global politics.
But I was just thinking when I was looking at that interaction that Trump actually called Biden, his predecessor, a stupid president. He said,
Yeah,
because of our stupid president, you were able to do ABC.
yeah.
And actually, Indian politics, despite the awful tutu meme that sometimes takes place between our different parties, I cannot think of a single Indian head of government who would have said that about his predecessor in the presence of a foreign head of state.
Yeah, I can't either, though you have no idea, and you and I have no idea what people actually say away from the cameras. But it is clear that at least when he appeals to a domestic constituency, Mr. Modi has said worse about many of his predecessors. So it's not entirely unprecedented.
Yes, but I think what you say on camera in the presence of a leader of another country is quite different from what goes on in domestic political constituencies, don't you think?
Fair enough, but he makes these remarks on camera anyway. The only thing is there isn't a foreigner sitting in the room. So it's not that unprecedented.
So let's talk about the rise of the right wing globally, right?
Yeah.
I think there's a clear pattern that's emerging in the world, and you had Meloni recently talk about how if Modi, me, and Trump get in the same room, we're called a threat to democracy. It was a snarky sort of take on left of center liberal elite politics.
Yeah.
Where are liberal elite politics in the world today?
Well, first of all, I think too much is made of all this left right stuff. If you were to believe the old distinctions between the left and the right, America would be the right and Russia would be the left. Yet, because America is siding with Russia, we're saying it's the rise of right politics. So I'm not sure these terms make that much sense any longer in this world order. Secondly, I'm not even sure if there's that much of a rise. I mean, Starmer got elected with a substantial majority, and he's certainly not right. Macron is still hanging on, and he's certainly not right in the sense that Meloni and Trump are. So too much perhaps is made of that. Also in the context of Modi and right and left. I mean, we can argue about whether the term has any meaning in India, and I would argue it doesn't. But even if it did, the problem with those kind of calculations is that unlike America, India has shown remarkable continuity in foreign policy. It's not like Trump who came in and said, I will change everything. Modi's basically stuck with our foreign policy through the ages, which is one of the reasons why India is emerging as an even stronger voice in the world.
Yeah, I would agree with that because even Rahul Gandhi, otherwise a trenchant critic of Modi, when asked about India's policy on Russia, Ukraine, said he actually supported the government.
Yeah. I think that's right. I think it was actually one of the finest moments for the Modi Jaishankar regime. They were asked by the United States to choose between Russia and America, and they said no, and they went back to what the hated Jawaharlal Nehru in their eyes would have called non alignment. They said, we are not on anybody's side, we are on India's side. When it came to the oil boycott, they said, in effect, we don't see why the Indian consumer should pay more because of America's geopolitical interests. It wasn't an easy thing to do. It was a remarkably difficult feat to pull off because they stayed friends with both sides at the end. And I sometimes think they haven't got enough credit for it.
I would agree with you. It's just that instead of calling it non-alignment, they call it multi-alignment. Just
But it's a bigger,
the
it's a,
label
it's
changed.
a,
It's the same thing.
it's a bigger word. That's all. Yeah.
Yeah, but I do think when you consider the fact that the Americans voted alongside Russia and India abstained at the vote on Russia Ukraine at the United Nations, it was quite an extraordinary moment because actually the Modi government got so much grief from Western powers for this policy. And in the end, the government does stand vindicated for holding its nerve.
Oh, absolutely. I think the Modi government had the guts to say that India's interests are not aligned with anybody, which is what we've said for 60 years. And this was an even more difficult time to say this, but they did. During the invasion of Afghanistan, which you may remember, when Russia expected India to come out and support, India did not of Russia. So there have been instances in the past where we've had these kind of conflicts. And to the credit of every Indian prime minister, and most recently Prime Minister Modi, we've held our nerve.
Before I come to what's happening in India, just one question about your kind of, your argument that the labels of right and left do not apply in a generalized way to understanding the world today. But something is happening in terms of political communication. There's an element of theater performance that has become perhaps necessary in politics like never before. Perhaps it's a social media fueled age, but also that issues that seem to alienate vast numbers of people don't seem to do well. So, for example, when they talk about Trump's success, they say, "Oh, the trans movement went too far. People weren't able to recognize their own families in some of the sort of woke politics that was playing out." Do you agree with that? Do you think that there's a kind of wokeness factor that is devouring mainstream politicians?
Yeah, I think that just illustrates my point that whether you're pro trans or anti trans has nothing to do with right wing economics or left wing economics. Yet we sort of associate an anti trans position with the right. So, I mean, as you said, and as we both said, I think this is meaningless. What we're seeing perhaps is an increase in political theater, though I'm not so sure about that. I think Trump is an exception. I think Starmer, Macron, the rest are pretty much within the usual paradigm. But what we are seeing increasingly is a hatred of the other. The way in which immigration has become an issue throughout the world. In India, we don't have immigration, though we are against Bangladeshis who come in. We see it in Hindu Muslim terms. There is much more a tendency now in the world for people in the majority to say, this is our country, we'll do it our way. And in that important respect, perhaps Trump and Modi have something in common.
There's a perception, and I would say not entirely incorrect, that of all the world leaders that Trump has met in recent weeks, Modi managed to handle him the best, right? But it came amid a big. You don't agree?
It's not true. Starmer handled him perfectly. When he went in, Trump had abused Starmer before, and everybody imagined this would be a disaster. Starmer had him purring like a pussycat got pretty much what he wanted, and left with his head held high. So I don't think Modi did badly. That's by no means the best anyone has done.
Okay, the only argument I was trying to make is that there were moments of some tension between Starmer and Trump, Macron and Trump, and there wasn't any visible tension between Modi and Trump. But I take your point. The question was somewhat different. There's a big debate over whether Modi should have responded more harshly, more aggressively on the issue of Indian illegal migrants who are being ferried back to India, not because they shouldn't be sent back, because they were shackled and videographed, and those videos were then set to music, which is something that was pretty unseemly to say the least. Do you think that Modi could have had that argument in public? How do you think we've handled the issue of not the deportation, because what's the other side on that, but on how these men and women were sent back home?
I'm pretty sure India has registered its protest and said, is it necessary to humiliate our citizens? But Modi is not Trump in that respect. He doesn't have to do it on camera. I'm sure messages have been sent.
But what is your personal take on the shackles and the handcuffs?
Well, this is how America transports prisoners. I mean, it isn't just Indians they've done this to. There's a variety of American movies. You may have seen Con Air, which deals with this kind of situation. Americans believe in shackling people, sending them to Gitmo or wherever. This is the way in which we do things. You and I may think it's barbaric. Anybody who's arrested, even on suspicion in America, even though there's not really any evidence, and they're released 24 hours later, is still made to be handcuffed with their hands behind their backs and to do what is called the perp walk. If you remember, they did this to DSK when he had that sex scandal,
Mm.
Dominique Strauss-Kahn. That is the American way. It's not a way much of the civilized world does things. It's not one that we approve of. But better or for worse, this isn't the first time this has happened with deportees, and it won't be the last.
Other nations, smaller nations, sent their own aircraft to get around this issue of prisoners coming back in shackles. The argument in India was, should the state be spending money on those who have gone illegally? Is that the state's problem? What's your take?
I don't think it's our problem. I think the people who left India to look for a better life, even if it was illegally in America, made their choices and they will have to live with those choices. Those of us who decided to stay in India, continue to work here, and pay taxes in India should not be asked to subsidize these people.
So you don't think we
And
should have sent
if you
down?
send, if, yeah, who would have paid for the aircraft? You and I, the Indian taxpayer. Why should we do that?
So we'll have to just suck it up, the shackles.
I don't think we have to suck it up. I think the
We as
deportees.
in we, the country, not you
It's
and I.
not it's not the country. It's people who've broken the law and opted to leave this country rather than stay in it. So I don't see it as an issue of Indian pride.
So, listening to you, and I want to come back now to the Indian context, it's quite interesting because I would say you are one of those, I'd include myself in the same group, who actually defy easy labels of right and left. You would be
Yeah.
called a liberal, but the classic liberal position on these shackles would have been send the planes, get them back home, etc. Right? On national security, on many other issues, you do not have the typical expected lefty view. And I think I would say, nor do I. The point is, what is the politics in India that mirrors our issue by issue opinion on things? In India, we still seem to be polarized in this right and left world, don't you think?
Yeah, we seem to be, and yet we're not really. For instance, the argument of the right all over the world is that you should pull back the borders of the state, that you should have less government, which is what Trump and Musk, one of whom is the president of the United States, it's not clear yet which one it is, are doing in America. I think something similar was promised by Modi when he talked about, forget the phrase, maximum governance, minimum government. He promised all that. Yet, if you look at the role of government over the last 11 years under Modi, it's increased much more. More bureaucrats have been hired. The government is involved in many more areas. The attempts to turn the PSUs around and turn them into profit centers, which was, I think, a doomed effort, has failed. If you look at share prices of those PSUs at the moment, if you look at the role of the repressive arms of the state, the ED, income tax, organizations like that, they play a much more important role in our lives than they ever did. I mean, think back 15 years ago, 16 years ago. How often would the enforcement directorate have come up in political conversations? It now comes up in nearly every conversation, particularly when you talk about party politics. So, using the traditional definitions of left and right, at least in terms of government, Modi is not right wing. If you use the other definition, which is that people are left to allow the market to look after them and that the government doesn't do anything, he's not left in that sense either. No prime minister has done so much in terms of welfare projects as Modi has done. So the whole argument that Modi is right wing or Trump is right wing is based on this notion that people who believe in majoritarianism are necessarily right wing and people who don't are left wing. And yet, that's not accurate if you look at communist Russia, Soviet Russia. It was a very majoritarian state. The Russians ruled everything. The other independent, what are now the independent republics, didn't get a look in. The Jews were persecuted. So the idea of majoritarianism, I think, is not a right idea or a left idea. And that's what Modi and Trump have in common.
So you're saying Modi is neither right nor left.
Yeah.
Understood through
I, I,
understood understood through the
no.
lens of economics, he's left.
Yeah.
Understood through the lens of economics, he's big government welfare schemes. So understood
Yeah.
through economics, he's left. Understood through identity politics, he's right. So he's
Yeah.
actually neither.
I would argue that identity politics is a category by itself and has nothing to do with left and right. Left wing people believe in identity politics, right wing people believe in identity politics. Stalin believed in identity politics, he wasn't right wing.
So if Modi is neither right wing nor left wing, how would you characterize the person who is still seen as his principal opponent? We can argue about how effective or ineffective he is, Rahul Gandhi. Is Rahul Gandhi left or right? And I ask this because some of the
Yeah.
supporters of the Congress party who don't like the BJP say one of Rahul's mistakes is he's gone too far left. Is Rahul Gandhi left wing?
I don't even know how you would define left wing in the terms that his critics are using. What they often say when they say he's gone too far left is he's identified too much with minorities and not enough with Hindus, which may or may not be true, but I wouldn't see it as left and right. If you're talking about economics, I think his sympathies in some ways are clearly on the left. In other ways, they're not. He's the man who believed in letting foreign companies come to India. He believed in globalization much more than, say, his mother did. So he's a difficult guy to characterize, but certainly his economics are pretty left, though perhaps not as left as Mr. Modi's.
So here's my question. If right and left as nomenclatures are becoming increasingly irrelevant, what is the lens we put on to understand or to look at politics through? Because if you see Modi's own political capital, something very interesting has happened. In June, after the Lok Sabha elections, it seems as if Modi had been contained, just restricted a bit, put within a kind of boundary that hemmed him in slightly. But every successful assembly win thereafter seems to indicate only one thing. Modi is back as the dominant political brand of India. And the Congress that seemed to be on the mend in June 2024 seems to be adrift. How do we understand this phenomena? Because Rahul Gandhi certainly sees himself as an ideologue. I don't know if he'd call himself right and left or left, but he sees himself as ideologically opposed to the BJP. If it's not right or left, how do we understand the success of one and the relative failure of the other?
I don't think right and left has much to do with it. I think Mr. Modi's popularity took a knocking during the parliamentary elections. I think the Congress had an advantage. I think it's indisputable, as you say, that his popularity has recovered and that the Congress opportunity has been destroyed or lost. There was much more they could have done to build on that win, but they never capitalized on the momentum. On the other hand, all the talk when Mr. Modi stood for election was that if he comes back, India will be transformed. Everyone will speak Hindi. There will be the South will be contained. There will be no more elections at different times for assemblies and Lok Sabhas. Everything will be together. So if you look at all the things he was supposed to do to transform the nature of India, none of those has successfully been pulled off yet. So, in terms of winning elections, yes, of course, I think people drew the wrong conclusions from the Lok Sabha. In terms of transforming India as people thought he would, well, not happened yet.
So, so did people take the wrong conclusion from the Lok Sabha elections, or did the opposition not build on the conclusion of the Lok Sabha elections?
I think both. I think the opposition screwed up in the aftermath of the Lok Sabha elections. I personally think that the opposition still hadn't worked out why Mr. Modi did badly and they did well. So when you don't know what message the voters are sending, you can't really act on it. I also think that Mr. Modi didn't go into the Lok Sabha election just hoping for a majority, which he didn't actually get. He went in thinking that he would be hailed as a transformative figure, as a man who rebuilt India as completely as Jawaharlal Nehru had built it. I don't think that hope has actually come to pass.
Hmm. So let's talk a little bit about something you addressed in your recent column for the print, which is the new tension over the redrawing of constituencies, which otherwise
Mhm.
is known as delimitation, right?
Yeah,
And you made the argument that Stalin expressed what so many others in the southern states feel but haven't yet expressed, that this isn't only about language, it's about South India taking the fall, as it were, for the failures of the Hindi belt, right?
yeah.
Um, but the language debate is a very complex debate. The real hub of the matter is this fear that they will have fewer seats representing them in the Lok Sabha once the delimitation project is completed.
Yeah.
What is the way around that? Because if you ask most people in India, do you understand delimitation? They'll say no, they don't understand it. It's technical. What what when you hear Stalin, do you see, what are the anxieties there? Do you think he's making a good argument for the southern states?
Yeah, I think the anxiety, Barkha, goes deeper even than seats in the Lok Sabha. There is a sense in the South that they are the states that are going ahead. If you look at their growth rates, if you look at their literacy rates, the South is doing much better than the North. There's also a sense in the South that states like UP, Bihar, basically the states of the Hindi belt, are dragging us back, and that there is no hope of a turnaround because elections there are won on things like the Kumbh Mela or identity politics, for want of a better term, and that economic development is simply not a priority there, nor is education, nor is any kind of development. There is a sense that the BJP, despite its very successful inroads into the South, is still essentially a party of the Hindi belt. And sure enough, that's where most of its seats come from. So there is that sense that if delimitation happens, the BJP will win every election because it doesn't appear to have any serious opposition to the Hindi belt. I don't agree with that. I think it does. But I think that is the fear of the South. And the fear of the South, therefore, is that the delimitation exercise will formalize what's already happening, that we become a country ruled by the North, whereas in fact, the North is holding us back, and the South, which is taking us forward, is being penalized for that. I mean, don't necessarily agree with all these emotions, but that I think, having traveled through South India recently, is the prevailing emotion.
So how does this argument resolve itself?
It doesn't. I mean, there is no obvious answer. There has to be, as various people have said, some kind of balance between majoritarianism, between the sense that democracy is one man, one vote, and you cannot have huge constituencies in, say, UP and small constituencies in Kerala. I mean, it's obvious why this is unacceptable. But equally, it's also true that no state or no bunch of states should be allowed to swamp the entire federal structure. It's not a new problem. The framers of the US Constitution groped with that, and their solution was the Electoral College, which is why many times, such as in Trump's first term, though Hillary Clinton won the popular vote, she didn't become president because the Electoral College was there to ensure that states' rights amounted to something. So we have to find the balance. What the balance is, I don't know. But equally, we don't have to resolve this next week. We need some kind of national debate, which I think the BJP is not keen on, to try and resolve this issue.
So in June 2024, after the Lok Sabha verdict, it appeared
Yeah.
as if the BJP would find it tougher to push ahead policy that was unilateral, because the numbers seem to make that argument. I think
Yeah.
after the assembly elections, it may be a very different portrait of politics. But then we have to come to the state of play in the opposition. So, for example, if you look at what's happening in the Congress with the Shashi Tharoor, although now they have put up a united front and they've said, oh, everything is okay. But it's quite clear that Shashi Tharoor feels he's been somewhat shafted, not been given a very meaty role. There's DK Shivakumar, literally waiting for his turn to be Chief Minister of Karnataka, probably sending his own messages by sharing a stage with Sadhguru at an event which is also attended by Amit Shah. Nothing in politics is innocuous. Rahul Gandhi seems to have taken the view that if anyone wants to leave the party, they can. And that's why a bunch of people we know over time have actually left the Congress party. How do you look at what's happening in the Congress today?
I think the Congress has always been a mess. Will Rogers used to say in the old days in America, I am a member of no organized political party. I am a Democrat. I think you could say that now. Everybody who's part of the Congress is not a part of any organized political party because the Congress is not organized. It's not a view that I think would disappoint Rahul Gandhi, who thinks of the Congress as being like a beehive with people buzzing around in different directions. He sees the Congress sometimes in sci-fi terms, but essentially he sees the Congress as some kind of powerhouse of different people pulling in different directions, but ultimately agreeing on the national interest. This is not the BJP's view of itself. It sees itself as an army. So when you have these two completely different views of political parties, the BJP will always, even when it's down, seem completely down, seem more organized. If you take the Congress's victory for its second term when Sonia Gandhi was leader and Advani was the leader of the other side, the Congress still had more fighting, more infighting than Advani's BJP did. And yet Advani's BJP was down. So this business about infighting sometimes can be misleading. And in this case, I mean, it's very specific. Both the fights you referred to are about just one thing, the chief ministership. In Karnataka, it's about the chief ministership. In Kerala, the reason why there's a concerted campaign to discredit Shashi Tharoor in the state party is for fears that he might want to become chief minister, and they want to polish him off before that happens. It's not a great thing to see. It's very ugly. And it's particularly unfair to Shashi Tharoor, who's one of the best politicians the Congress has. But it's not unprecedented.
But this idea of the BJP as an army, cadre-driven, ideology-driven, the
Yeah.
Congress as a kind of haphazard Big Ten powerhouse of ideas. This may be true today, but if you look back at the Advani Vajpayee BJP, their fighting was a constant source of entertainment to journalists. They would constantly plant stories against each other. There were camps. It was an easy to access party. It was much easier to report on than the Congress party. So I think we're just talking of a very different BJP today and a very different Congress today.
Yeah, I mean, there are two different points. One is Modi's BJP the same as Vajpayee's BJP? No, it isn't. Is there an Advani-like figure in Modi's BJP who could pose a threat to Vajpayee, who has his own proteges? No, there isn't. Is it very different lower down? I don't think it is. I think the BJP has always been cadre driven. I think in the final analysis, the RSS calls the shots. I think under Mr. Modi, the RSS probably counts for a little bit less because Mr. Modi is much more popular than the RSS is. But I don't think the essential structure, if you take away the gossip about who was on Vajpayee's side and who was on Advani's side, has changed that much.
Finally, therefore, what does Modi's third term look like to you? What have we seen so far? Is there enough basis on which to make a few educated guesses of what may come next, or do we see Modi as a different sort of prime minister in this term? I think I remember talking to you before the elections, and you said you didn't expect him to be widely a different prime minister, but then the numbers took the BJP below a majority, and now he seems to be back in form, fully back in form again. So, what do you expect his third term, the remaining part of it, to be like?
Well, I think he's not exactly the same as he was before. All elections, assembly elections in the old days, were referendums on Mr. Modi. It's not been true this time. If you look at the Haryana election, which the BJP against the odds won, Mr. Modi hardly campaigned there. If you look at the Maharashtra election, which again the BJP alliance won against expectations, Mr. Modi was not a factor. That election was not fought on national issues. It was fought on things like welfare measures, which the BJP successfully implemented and the opposition didn't understand. So the idea that Mr. Modi is the once in the future leader and every election, whether it's a municipal election or a Lok Sabha election, is a means of strengthening his hand, that's been dispensed with. I think the BJP's local parties, its local units, its state leaders count for more outside of the Hindi belt, perhaps, than they did earlier. So that's changed. I think Yogi Adityanath, who we said at the time of the Lok Sabha polls was out, he'd had no say in choosing the candidates, etc., is back in form. I think people are taking him much more seriously, having once written him off. So to argue outwardly that it's the same, yeah, it is the same. Inwardly, it's not exactly the same. Also, if you were to look at all the things he was going to do to transform India, there have been no sort of precedent shattering moments since he's been re-elected. There's been no demonetization or anything like that. It's pretty much he's run a stable ship and stayed the course.
So, to that extent, you do believe that Modi is more held in today than he was before?
I think the phrase I would use is biding his time. He knows that despite the impression he gives of Chandrababu Naidu and people being totally on his side, things are not that easy. I think he's feeling his way around. For instance, if you have a north south debate and you push Andhra into a corner, you know which side Chandrababu Naidu will take. So there are certain issues that don't affect Chandrababu as long as you keep giving him money for his state, and he will go along. But the moment you push him into areas that are without precedent, that are different, he may not go along. And I think Mr. Modi is very conscious of that. He's waiting for more assembly elections. He's waiting to see what the political clout of his state leaders is before making any more moves. So, yes, he's the same old Mr. Modi. I think he has the same ambitions. He has, to a large extent, the same popularity, though perhaps not as much. But politics is no longer all about Narendra Modi. There are other issues, and Mr. Modi is biding his time to decide which issues he's going to raise when.
Fascinating. We leave it there. One of the delights of speaking to you is that we can actually have a complex and nuanced conversation and still have it be absolutely riveting and interesting. Thank you so much, and hope
Thank
to
you,
talk
Barkha.
to you again soon. Thanks, Vir. Take care.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Bye. Bye. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.